Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, moving away from the private sector. We're 1 week into a new partnership that has UNM Hospital providing medical care at the Metropolitan Detention Center after years of abuses under for-profit companies.
The death rate is markedly higher in those facilities across the nation than in places where the government directly operates the medical care.
And the U.S. Forest Service now says it accidentally started a third major forest fire in our state last year. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. We're tracking several environmental stories with long-term implications across our state. The U.S. Forest Service now says it caused last year's Cerro Plata fire in the Jemez Mountains, which burned more than 45,000 acres. In about 1 minute, I'll sit down with our line opinion panelists for the week to talk about the holdover pile burn that caused it and the consequences that might follow this revelation. Then, in the second half of the show, we'll be talking water. More than 80% of the state's fresh water is being used for agriculture. I'll ask if the state should step in to prioritize residential and drinking water. And at the bottom of the hour, our land's Laura Paskus updates the legal battle between Texas, Colorado, and New Mexico over a 15-year-old water sharing agreement. The three states say they've come up with a plan to move forward, but the feds haven't signed off yet. That's in about 45 minutes. But we start with that announcement from the Forest Service, claiming responsibility for the Cerro Plata fire after months of silence. Let's get to the line. Welcome to our line opinion panels for the week. We're happy to be joined in studio by Paula Garcia. She's the executive director of the New Mexico Acequia Association. Across the table, John Fleck, a professor at the University of New Mexico, who's also a water researcher at the university's Utton Center. And across the table from him, freelance reporter Elizabeth Miller is with us as well. Now we begin with a look back to spring 2022. That's when the Cerro Plata fire burned up nearly 45,000 acres in the Jemez Mountains. Now we've learned the U.S. Forest Service caused that fire through their management techniques. The fire burned for nearly 2 months, as you might recall, destroying 10 structures and forcing people nearby to evacuate. Now the Forest Service says a holdover fire from a prescribed burn 2 weeks prior ignited brush in the forest, sparking the fire. Now, although we've known about the prescribed burn for well over a year, the Forest Service didn't confirm the connection between those two until last month. Let's start with why we're here just now hearing this, John, that this prescribed burn caused the Cerro Plata fire. Is there a legitimate reason, John, for the U.S. Forest Service to be so tight-lipped about its work and the causes of its work? From your sense of it, why do they do this? Why does it take so long to get info from them?
So the short answer is no. One of the things that we have seen, and I had a career as a journalist before I entered academia and saw this over the time that I worked in newspapers, an increasing unwillingness by government agencies, especially the federal government, to be interactive and forthcoming with information about controversial subjects. So was a time when I would call the Forest Service, for example, and the director of the forest would get on the phone with me, right? And you could have those kind of conversations. Increasingly, for a variety of reasons, but information control is one of the most important ones, that's not happening, and I think that's really problematic in this particular case, given the community impacts and the importance of our ability in dealing with the problem of our forest management to work together across the boundaries of government agencies. The top of that pyramid is the federal government.
Interesting points there. Elizabeth, welcome to the table, first of all, first time here. I'm curious, this was the third fire started by the U.S. Forest Service last year, all of them being the direct result of prescribed fires. How necessary are these prescribed fires? We always ask this question for forest management and everything else. We hear a lot of things about ground cover. We've had a lot of things come up, and we're not terribly thinned statewide. Are our hands tied here? Do we have to do this at this point?
I think the role of prescribed fire ecologically is it's hugely important. We did 110 years of wildfire suppression. The rule was to get every smoke out by 10 a.m. the next day. And the result of that is that we do have a lot of dense stands of trees, sometimes even different species of trees spreading into the north slopes of forests. It's really affected forest composition and forest structure. Right. And fire is a wonderful way for the ecosystem to reset itself. It thins out the brush. It allows for different species to move in. It can do all of these wonderful things. We also have a really difficult time with fire in an ecosystem where we've built up into the forest. There are more and more people building in what's called the wildland-urban interface, so there are homes encroaching in areas right up against some of these very dense stands of forest. And so finding this balance of bringing fire back for all of the necessary ecological purposes that it serves and not putting structures and homes at risk is a really tricky place. But I think the scary takeaway could be from these string of terrible incidents that we need to stop prescribed fire, and that could further compound some of these issues.
Sure. Elizabeth, I also want you to get in on what John spoke about as well. You're a water researcher. You did a big series this past spring. We'll talk about here in a little bit about water. In your sense of it, why is the Forest Service so secretive about this? And the reason I ask that, it seems it would be impossible to get to policy decisions you're describing without being timely about why certain things happen. Am I correct on that connection?
I think it's a real conundrum for the Forest Service. They have a directive to use the best available science, and pairing science that's evolving as quickly, particularly around climate change right now, as we're seeing, and the conditions change. Like the problem with the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fire, which also started with a prescribed burn, is that it was an outdated burn plan, and it was a plan that didn't adjust according to weather changing the day of. Right. And so where the Forest Service, I think, is stalling out now is in connecting the dots between following some of the changes in policy that came down after last year's 90-day ban on prescribed burns. Then that was a nationwide measure to try to make sure that the Forest Service wasn't starting these kinds of problems. And the changes that have been implemented internally, the changes that have rippled out of major infrastructure bills that passed on a federal level last year, that's allowed for, from what I hear, more staffing, more community outreach. And yet I'm not seeing quite as much transparency around that, and not as much attention to rebuilding the faith from the communities as is needed. Good
point there. Glad you got that in. That's an important point. Paula, thank you for coming in today as well. Appreciate the work you do with the Acequia Association. I do have a question for you on this idea of climate change, how much it might be contributing to this problem. It's an interesting quote in the Santa Fe New Mexican from Randy Moore, someone John knows well, the Forest Service chief here in the state, of course, that these kind of fires, holdover fires, are, quote, a recent phenomenon caused by prolonged droughts associated with climate change. Does that absolve the Forest Service a little bit here, or should they have been a little quicker in understanding, we're in the middle of climate change, maybe you need to make some changes as well? I'm interested in your thoughts on where he's coming from on that.
Sure. Let's put this into context. The Cerro Grande fire was also started by a prescribed burn. So that was 20 years ago.
Thank you.
So if indeed the Forest Service was keeping up with all of the changing conditions related to climate change, those new protocols should have been in place by now. So I do think there was an institutional failure. I don't think it absolves the Forest Service to say, well, it's climate change, because we've known about climate change for decades. So those fires preceded Hermit's Peak, the Cerro Pelado burn pile, which was a holdover. Though there was enough procedures in place to ensure that the fires wouldn't get out of hand. So I think that there was perhaps some human error, but it was more importantly, I think it was institutional error, because they're not keeping up with the pace of climate change. The moisture content of the trees is very low. The soil moisture is very low, and we're dealing with higher temperatures. So there's all these factors that contribute to fires getting out of control. And I think there's a lot of information in the investigation reports about mistakes that were made. And are we going to learn from those mistakes? That's a good question. I don't want to be in the next community where there's an escaped prescribed burn. And there's going to have to be a lot of change in the Forest Service to regain the trust of the communities that they serve, the forest-dependent communities, the land-based people. These fires affected some very, from a perspective of land-based people. You're looking at pueblos, there's tribal lands that were impacted by Cerro Pelao. There's downstream traditional rural communities that were impacted.
That's right.
And regaining the trust of those communities is going to take some dramatic change. They're not tweaks to manuals. It's an overall management approach. And I think they need to listen better. I think they need to adapt more to climate change and integrate those lessons learned. Because if it takes a whole year to figure out what went wrong, then the pace of institutional change is going to be too slow to keep up with the demands. And we don't get, being from a forest community, we don't get a lot of comfort hearing that, we have some better rules now. And like, it's going to take some a lot of concerted effort to make that happen.
I can see that for sure. Speaking about slowness, John, we're talking about making people whole here. Congress approved nearly $4 billion to compensate victims of the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon wildfire, as we know. Are victims of the Cerro Pelado fire entitled to federal money, or is the current slow drip of FEMA, as we know, as for funds for survivors? What's going on here? How are people being made whole here, and can they be actually?
It's clear that we have an obligation as a broad community to those communities like Paula's that were so dramatically damaged by these fires. It is clear that the system that we have set up to do that is failing us. And we have to do better, but it's a hard problem. Like figuring out how to help rebuild communities is a non-trivial problem. So if I had the answer, or if the answers were easy, it would be done, right?
That's right.
But it's important, because a lot of the folks watching this program, folks living in urban areas who are thinking, this is not my problem. But in fact, what we have is a broad shared responsibility, because the water supply, for example, that Albuquerque and Santa Fe gets flows through forests, and flows through forests that are a mix of private land and state land and federal land, and programs like the Rio Grande Water Fund, where we're trying to bring together many of the people who are the beneficiaries of what this forest offers, not just leaving this as a problem of the federal government and the folks who live there, but New Mexico as a whole is dependent broadly on these forests, and understanding that solving this problem, dealing with the changes we need to make in a forest is sort of a shared responsibility.
Yeah. Elizabeth, where does the state step in? I get this question a lot. We talk so much about the Forest Service, the federal government, all that kind of thing. Are we doing as much as we could be possibly from a state point of view, in your view?
As much as we could be possibly is a really difficult question to speak to, but I think one of the interesting things I've noted in the after effects of the last year is that the state came forward with a policy of saying you do not start a prescribed fire on something the National Weather Service has declared as a red flag warning day, which is to say that the conditions are dry, the wind is up, fire could spread easily, and that was the situation with the Hermit's Peak fire. Of those two fires was that it started with on a red flag day. And anyone I spoke to in the course of reporting on that fire said as a land user, as a land owner, I would never have lit a fire on my land that day. I don't know why the federal government would have. So that the federal government has been willing to hear that statement and that policy from the state and adopt it, even though policy doesn't usually run upstream like that. I think that's a sign of New Mexico's ability to take a stand on some of these issues and get some responsiveness from the federal government, and that's at least one thing that they've achieved.
Good points there. Thanks to our Line Opinion panel. We'll meet back here at the table in about 15 minutes to talk about how our state uses its limited amount of fresh water and why some groups are calling for a change.
The obligations under the compact are held by all New Mexicans. It's not just the farmers who have to deliver the water. And so if there was a call to deliver a lot more water, that would potentially come from not only the lower Rio Grande, but potentially the middle Rio Grande and other places along the river. Moreover, the compact is an agreement. It's a contract of sorts. And we as New Mexicans should stand by our word.
Peter Kubra has been advocating for the rights of incarcerated people in New Mexico since the 1980s. He's been involved in some of the longest-running court cases in state history over conditions inside the walls. Now the retired Albuquerque attorney is sounding a note of optimism as University of New Mexico Hospital takes over the medical services contract at the Bernalillo County Jail. Executive producer Jeff Proctor spoke with Mr. Kubra about why it's a welcome change from private companies that have repeatedly failed to care for people who are locked up.
Peter, thank you so much for joining me on New Mexico in Focus today.
It's a pleasure being here. Thank you.
As we just heard Gene say, you and I are going to spend some time talking today about the new partnership between UNM Hospital and Bernalillo County for provision of medical services at the jail. But I'd like to begin by backing up a little bit and talking about sort of what's been going on at the Metropolitan Detention Center in recent years. We've had more than 20 deaths there since the beginning of 2020. Many of those were folks who were detoxing from substances. What have been the points of failure that have led to that huge increase in deaths at the jail?
Well, the two big things that I've noticed since the Corizon Corporation was brought in October of 2021 is that this corporation, even unlike the other for-profit corporations, did not follow any of the patterns that we had established there that were working. And so, for example, they made longtime employees start to do every kind of nursing across the board in a way that they weren't skilled to do, instead of specialize in the areas where they had special skills. And so there was ineptitude among the staff in a way we didn't see before. But most troubling is that they never did staff up. Almost half of the positions that were authorized and required by the federal court order in the McClendon case, they never filled in the almost 2 years that they were there. And of course, the compounding factor that has contributed to all of the problems with healthcare inside the jail is that there is not enough custody staff. And so with all of those vacancies, the custody staff frequently didn't get people to the appointments that they needed. So for people with chronic problems who didn't die in the first couple of days, it was often the case that they were never taken to the medical appointments that they had scheduled because there was no one to just walk them down the hall to get them to the clinic.
Let's go a little deeper on who is in the jail. I know you wanted to talk some about the population numbers, the most recent population numbers. What are we seeing over the course of the last year or two in terms of how many folks are in the jail and what kind of life status they have?
Well, there are a couple of things that I think of as really important for the public to know. There was a time when we had less than 1,100 people inside the jail, just a couple of years ago. And today we're bumping up against 1,600. Mm-hmm. And so that's been a substantial, I think it's around a 40% increase in the number of people housed inside the jail. There are several factors that go into that, but the one that I'm most concerned about is it appears to me that the city of Albuquerque made a decision in the last year or two that they were going to start to crack down on the homeless. And so countless people, hundreds of people, every month are being incarcerated for petty things that no one else would be incarcerated for. Were you trespassing? Were you loitering? Were you jaywalking? People who don't have permanent addresses, the city of Albuquerque has their police department sweeping them out of the streets and into the jail. And so that's one of the big components. And that's the thing that is most remarkable to me. This morning I was looking at the website. The county has they call it a dashboard that shows the census in the jail and it breaks down certain traits. Today, over 500 people inside the jail. There's about 1,591 people, as I recall, on the dashboard as committed to the jail. Over 500 people are people who don't have an address. And so they call them transient. It's not necessarily so. Many of these people have lived their whole lives here. But it is shocking that over a third of the people in the jail are people who can't afford housing.
It is shocking, over a third. That's a huge number. And I think it's a good segue into my next question. Living in Albuquerque in 2023, you cannot turn your head even a quarter of a degree without seeing evidence of, or at least discussion of, increasing crime rates and the crisis facing unsheltered people here. To swing it back a little bit to those medical services that are supposed to be provided in the jail, how does that provision or lack of that provision inside the jail impact what's happening in the community outside the jail?
Well, my thoughts are these, that there is a system that was designed and established and put into place a few years ago called the Resource and Reentry Center. And it's at the old Metro Courthouse at Roma and 4th. And the concept of that is a very sound concept, that people would go there and have a chance there to have a warm handoff to social services, mental health services, drug treatment services. But in fact, it has never operated properly. And so people are routinely being brought there long after business hours, oftentimes as late as 3 a.m., straight from the jail, and then cast out. And at that point, that facility can't really do anything for them. So the Resource Reentry Center is not working properly. The other thing that is very concerning to me is that what we call discharge planning or reentry planning is nominally supposed to be happening for everybody who leaves the jail, but because of the lack of staffing, both security staffing and mental health staffing, that has ground to a halt as well. And so people are leaving there in the dark, in the night, no place to go, no
medication
supports available. Conceptually, people are supposed to get access to pills by getting a script and then going to Walgreens and so forth to keep their medicine. But oftentimes people never get those pills. Because really what has become the truth is something that the jail warden has said. He came from Texas and he's got a background in other places, and he said he doesn't run a jail, he runs New Mexico's biggest detox facility. And so the people with problems with drugs and alcohol and also psychiatric conditions, those are primarily the people in the jail. Most of the people inside the jail in the last few years have been receiving psychiatric care while in jail. And so the previous warden said that he wasn't running a jail, he was running New Mexico's biggest mental health facility.
So to go back to something you had mentioned earlier, you did mention Corizon, the company that previously had the medical services contract at the Metropolitan Detention Center. I'd like to ask just a brief question about that model. Having for-profit companies perform that work, what problems or issues have you seen with that model?
I would encourage you and others who are listening, watching, to take a look online at, just look up Reuters and private prison health care. And you'll find an article from a couple of years ago where Reuters did this in-depth study. So what some people have called the medical incarceration industrial complex is something that's developed in my years as an advocate. I started doing this kind of work helping people who get incarcerated back in the 80s. And since that time, privatized health care by for-profit corporations has proliferated in America. And the last I saw, the statistic was that about 65% of all people who are incarcerated are getting their medical care from private for-profit corporations in America. And frankly, those corporations have no incentive to give good care. They make their profit by withholding care. And so the death rate among people who are in a facility where private for-profit corporations are the vendor, the provider of health care, the death rate is markedly higher in those facilities across the nation than in places where the government directly operates the medical care.
I think you kind of just answered my next question, but I'm going to try it anyway and see if it kind of spurs you to say something in addition. That model that you just described is changing for MDC. Just last week, UNM Hospital took over that medical services contract. It's a 4-year contract, $20 million a year. It creates a new government entity called the MDC Healthcare Authority. For as long as I have known you, you have advocated for a setup like that. Why?
Well, that one's really simple. In 1995, some other lawyers and I sued the jail because of how people with intellectual disabilities and psychiatric conditions were being mistreated, abused, and neglected inside the old jail downtown. And as a result of that McClendon case, we worked with the city, which was then administering the jail, and they negotiated with the University of New Mexico. And UNM's Psychiatric Center began, when we settled that case in 1996, to be the provider of psychiatric care and mental health services. And then in the next couple of years, they became the provider of all health care. And through 2003, when the city threw up its hands and said, we don't want to do this anymore, county, you have to take back the jail management. At that time, through 2003, UNM was running the operation, and we were seeing market improvement once they were there compared to what we saw before that. And when the county decided to put out a request for proposals and let any vendor offer to do it, then these corporations, as they do, they come like sharks and they say, I'll do it, I'll do it for less. And they promise to follow the orders in the McClendon case. They never do. They knowingly are bidding at a number that is not realistic to comply with the court orders or with good standard practice either. And then these corporations have, profited as much as they could, reduced care as much as they could get away with, pocketed the money, and then move on. And then we've repeated that cycle ever since 2003.
I think some people watching this are going to say, the leadership of the county isn't changing, the leadership at the jail isn't changing. Will this new entity necessarily usher in more transparency, more accountability, and most importantly, better care for the people who are incarcerated there?
That hangs in the balance right this minute. Because this health authority, I fully support. This is the best development I've seen in decades with respect to our jail system. But it's only conceptually so. Because UNM stepped up and their leaders decided that they were going to do this because, one, it was the right thing. It would save lives of their patients who they served before jail, they serve after jail. Now they're going to serve them continuously. So UNM correctly said, we're going to save some lives. We're going to help people have better quality of life. And so they did that courageously, but they also did it at great risk, because the contract that they signed, or I guess it's now called a joint powers agreement between UNM and the county, it says that the county's only going to pay the same inadequate amount of money they've been paying for the private company until they negotiate something else. And so that's the key question. The county stopped giving decent care to save money. The county, for years, kept paying too little to save money. And now the county has to either pay an adequate amount, or even UNM can't rescue the situation. So it comes down to whether the county commission, the county manager, will actually afford sufficient dollars to make this happen. Now, I want to say there's really an easy answer to that. Back in 2015, when the county created the Behavioral Health Initiative, there's a lot of new dollars. I think we're around $29 million generated annually through the Behavioral Health Initiative. And I and other advocates started saying in 2016, let's match those local dollars with the Medicaid program. So for every dollar that we get from the county, we'll get $3.50 from the federal government through the Medicaid program. To this day, the county's never done it.
So last question is this: how will we measure success of this partnership? When's a good time to come back and look at this, and what will be the benchmarks that say this is working or has worked?
Well, I'm going to be explicit about it. At this juncture, just giving some basic care to people over the next few months, that by itself would be heroically different. And so we need to think in the next few months about going from grossly inadequate care, unconstitutional care, to constitutional care where people get rudimentary care. And they need to staff up. UNM has had difficulty for reasons I don't yet understand, increasing the staff. And in fact, some people have left for reasons that are mysterious. So right now we're still grossly understaffed. And so we need to get through this initial phase, which is still a crisis. And people are at risk of death today because we don't have enough security staff and enough medical mental health staff. So let's look at, by the beginning of next year, can we have a stable, basic medical mental health program? Ultimately, though, the things that will be the best measures are, of course, reductions of deaths and then reductions of incarceration. Because the lack of proper mental health treatment and drug treatment for the people who leave that jail is the biggest single cause for many of these petty offenses. People who don't get treatment for both of those problems end up committing new offenses. And we can reduce the census in the jail through good health care. And so those are the two critical measures to me.
Peter Kubra, thanks so much for coming down today. I really appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thanks so much for the work.
Thank you to Jeff and Peter Kubra for that conversation. You're going to watch the entire unedited interview right now on the New Mexico in Focus YouTube page. Welcome back for one final discussion here on The Line. A national activist group is calling for stricter water access to pecan, dairy, and alfalfa farming industries across New Mexico. The Washington, D.C.-based Food and Water Watch released a study last month showing more than 80% of New Mexico's fresh water is used for agriculture. The group is urging state officials to curb any growth in these industries and to focus on preserving water used for residential instead. Now, the study caught the attention of Albuquerque Journal reporter Kathy Cook, who spoke to several farmers who disagreed, with one saying, quote, "The best way to allocate those resources is through free market efforts," end quote. Given New Mexico's scarcity of water, Paul, I'll start with you. Is this current model sustainable, and what should the state government regulatory role be here? This is the interesting part here, the regulatory side. Our executive branch has a role, the legislature has a role. We've got a lot of people looking at this. What's the best approach in your view?
Well, our state has a lot of management tools already to deal with how we allocate water in New Mexico. We have to remember that the water rights are already in place.
Okay.
And that any future changes in how water is used is regulated by the state.
Right.
So you could change uses through a tightly regulated process, and it does involve buying and selling or leasing water, but the state engineer has to consider public welfare, conservation of water, and impairment of other existing water rights.
Right.
So it's a problem that's part of water policy, and it can be addressed in a way that's through our regulatory and democratic process. It's not something like there's a silver bullet, you just take water from agriculture.
Right.
First of all, the 80% number, I think, is something we need to look at, because
The 80% fresh water being used for agriculture?
Yeah,
Okay.
because that's based on diversions.
Okay.
If you look at in terms of a full water budget, agriculture isn't using that 80%. There's a lot of evaporation that's also part of the overall water budget. So I think the number is misleading.
In what sense? Is it too high in your view?
I think it's too high. It's too high.
How many percentage points would you guess?
Well, there's some estimates that evapotranspiration from the bosque is about 20-some%.
Okay.
Reservoir evaporation, depending on how big the reservoir is, could be 20-some%, and agriculture is in the range of 20-some%.
Okay.
So it's overly simplistic to think that we just take water out of agriculture. It's not to defend wasteful practices. No, I think we also have to distinguish between surface and groundwater.
Okay.
And we need to be much more mindful about groundwater use. The report does one thing I think that's important. It's sounding the alarm about how we manage water in New Mexico, and it's calling for better data.
I see.
And it's really important that we are really carefully managing our groundwater, regardless of what the use is, whether it's agriculture or municipal. And I think we need to have a really robust regulatory framework, robust data sets, so that we know what we're managing, so we can see how much is left in the tank.
Right.
You know, how close
That's
to
right.
E are we? Are we in the middle? We need better data.
That's an excellent analogy. I really appreciate that. Elizabeth, I mean, for example, to buttress Paula's point here, mega dairies in New Mexico require 11 billion gallons of water annually. every year. That's a ton of water. We can have little bits about the report here that may not have worked, and I think Paula made a good overall sort of idea of how we look at the report in a broader sense. But for the report for you specifically in the research you have done, were they on the mark here on the alarm of the amount of fresh water we are using for agriculture?
I think the most useful thing we can do with some of these reports is to use them as a prompt to reconsider systems as a whole,
Right.
to reconsider historic pathways and what kind of future we want to build, what priorities we want to have into the future. Because what they're essentially asking is, here are all the numbers we've lined out. What do you think about this pattern of use, and is this the system we want to perpetuate into the future? And we just exited the hottest July in recorded history. This year may be the hottest the planet has been in 120,000 years. That predates the dawn of agriculture by 110,000 years. You know, to say that we're not in unprecedented territory, and to say we've done it this way in the past and it's worked this way in the past and we don't have to adjust into the future, I think that would be the fundamental error that we could make as we move through conversations about this report and any other.
Sure. You know, John, watchdog groups do what they do. Their whole thing is to move things forward, move the conversation forward. Sometimes shock value is part of that, and that's fine, you know, but we're talking about fresh water and drinking water here, so it's not that much of a shock. However, agriculture generates more than 250,000 jobs a year here in New Mexico. According to the state's Department of Agriculture, the industry brought in $40 billion last year. A third of the country's pecans are produced in New Mexico. Just a sense of who's using water for what reason. Can we really move those kind of folks to a different position? If you're the third biggest pecan grower in the nation, if I'm pecan growing, nothing's going wrong here. If I'm them.
So one of the challenges with the underlying premise of the report is this sort of fundamental demonization of one particular set of folks in our community in the way they use water. And to Elizabeth's point about the things we need to do going forward, we need to recognize that as water becomes more scarce, we have a multiplicity of different kinds of communities. You know, agriculture is no one thing, from a 15,000 cow mega dairy to the farmers of northern New Mexico and Acequia. They're very different things. And we need to recognize that we're trying to negotiate a landscape with a multiplicity of values. But we also need to look at the history of what we're already doing, which I think the activist group, which Food and Water Watch, ignores. And so agricultural water use, by the kinds of measures they're using, is down 30% over the last couple of decades. So people who farm are already doing the things that this report says we should want to do. They're complaining about alfalfa.
But are they actually doing it, or are they forced to do it?
Well, sure. This is when people have less water, they use less water, and that's what we see happening. My point is that as a result of ongoing adaptation, as everybody figures out there's less water over here, so I got to use less, and I have to share with these neighbors. I have to use some, you have to use some. How do we collectively approach this? Municipal water use is going down, agricultural water use is going down. In other words, we as a community in this series of decentralized actions are already doing the kinds of things that need to be done. And if we are to solve the kinds of problems Elizabeth talked about, we need to recognize first, what are the tools we already have? How have they worked? What can we learn about what has been successful? So alfalfa farmers, for example, they're growing a lot less alfalfa, right? Because there's less water, right? So the very thing that Food and Water Watch complains about, it's bad alfalfa. Well, we should grow less alfalfa. Well, that's what's already happening. And if you don't recognize the things that are already being done, you can't come up with a plan to help us move forward collectively with these shared values.
Again, that's not the activist group responsibility, that last part you mentioned there. So where do we stand now with the state when it comes to the drought plan? How much updating do we need? I mean, what are we talking about here? How do we handle our own business instead of having people throw bombs about what we're doing or not doing? What's the next, in your view, what's next?
So
water engineer?
So last
water
year, Paula and I both participated in a broad, far-reaching process launched by Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham and Mike Hammond, the state engineer. This broad-based water task force, state water task force, came up with a suite of really important recommendations. One of the recommendations is consistent with the Food and Water Watch argument. We need more funding for the State Water Data Act and better data. Right. It's a challenging problem. Sure. Everybody has this problem. It's not like we're lazy and other people are smart. Right. It's a hard problem. It launched the first steps toward a really comprehensive water planning process, both regionally based and statewide, where you can get people in communities together and say, like, this is our community. How much do we need agriculture to be part of our economy? How much do we need to be sure our cities have to continue to exist? And a collaborative process, not just saying from some top down, that use of water bad, whether it's cities are using too much or whether it's agriculture is using too much of others. And so these kinds of processes, that's how we really solve these problems. You don't solve it from the top of the pyramid with an edict.
I would agree with that. I think that water scarcity is a collective problem, and it's not going to be effective from that collaborative view to demonize any particular use too much.
Do you guys hear that as demonization? I mean,
Not
just
necessarily.
listing how people use water as demonization?
I don't think so. That maybe wasn't the right word, but I also think that just the premise of the report is that if you just move water from agriculture to cities, that's going to solve the problem, or you end these particular kinds of uses. It doesn't account for the fact that, in fact, in the Lower Rio Grande, a presentation I heard last week to the interim committee was that agriculture had remained fairly steady during a certain time period. That's called the D2 baseline on the Rio Grande Compact. Agriculture had remained pretty steady, but DCMI, which is domestic, commercial, municipal, industrial use, had gone up 250%.
Wow.
So agriculture is not getting in the way of that growth. It's happening. There's transitions happening, and if anything, we should be thinking about how we retain all the values in our community that we want to protect into the future. I don't think anyone wants to see agriculture disappear at the expense of urban growth. In fact, if you transferred all the surface water rights to wells for municipal or industrial use, it'd be an ecological disaster.
Could you imagine?
Because you would deplete the aquifer, you would destroy the river, and then you would deplete the water commons that we all rely on for our lives. So I think the process of water planning, the type of task force that John's describing, when we're thinking about all the aspects. We talked about watersheds, we talked about groundwater, we addressed in some small way agriculture, but also rural water systems. All of this multiplicity of interests, and there's no cookie cutter approach. Every community is different. The hydrological conditions are different. So, and I also think we really need to look at the difference between surface and groundwater, because surface water is whatever is provided by nature. And when it runs out that year, you stop irrigating.
That's right.
And we're already being cut by nature. We don't need a bureaucracy to cut us. We don't need draconian laws to say no more agriculture. Nature is cutting us off. Now, groundwater, it's rain or shine.
First, we need to wrap up. I want to test your level of optimism, all y'all here, just real quick. Are we on the right direction? Are you optimistic? 10 seconds, if you could.
Yes, but less than I was 5 years ago.
Oh, interesting. Elizabeth, what do you think?
I want to know the answer to why less than 5 years ago.
It's not that long ago, I know, really.
Right.
Are you optimistic about where things are headed for water management here?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's really difficult to say. I think it's not as big a priority as it really needs to be for some of our state leadership.
Paula, what do you think? You're optimistic from your point of view, Acequia Association?
I'm optimistic about people and our ability to adapt. I'm not optimistic about the future of water. It's going to get more scarce and more difficult.
Yeah, exactly right. Thanks again to Paula, Executive Director of the New Mexico Acequia Association, John Flecht, UNM professor and water researcher at the Utten Center at the university, and freelance is not a great word. How about independent journalist Elizabeth Miller for being on the show this week? Be sure to let us know what you think about any of the topics covered on our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram pages, and catch any episode you may have missed on the PBS app, on your Roku or smart TV. Now for an update on a years-long legal battle over water sharing between our state, Colorado, and Texas. Here's Our Land's Laura Paskus.
It might be hard to remember today, but in the 1980s and 90s, New Mexico's reservoirs were doing pretty well. That started to change drastically in the 2000s, with year after year of drought and temperatures rising. In 2008, 2 water districts, one in Texas and one in New Mexico, worried about what they saw happening at Elephant Butte Reservoir. In cooperation with the federal government, they came up with an agreement to share water during dry times. But the states of New Mexico and Texas weren't actually a part of that agreement. And former Attorney General here in New Mexico, Gary King, sued the federal government, saying too much of the Rio Grande's water was going to Texas. Texas disagreed and then alleged that by allowing farmers to pump groundwater connected to the Rio Grande, New Mexico had been shortchanging Texas under the Rio Grande Compact of 1938. When Texas sued New Mexico and our upstream neighbor Colorado, we all landed in the Supreme Court. That expensive and stressful legal battle has gone on for years. Now, the 3 states say they've come up with a plan to move forward. And recently, federal judge Michael Malloy, he's what's called the special master on the case, he issued an order giving that settlement the green light. He also is recommending that the Supreme Court do the same, though the federal government hasn't agreed to the plan. So to help us understand what is going on, I recently spoke with water attorney Adrian Oglesby. He directs the Utton Center at the UNM Law School. Adrian Oglesby, thanks for being with me today.
Yeah, it's great to see you, Laura. It's been a while.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So New Mexico is celebrating Judge Malloy's decision, but the federal government hasn't actually signed on yet. Does that matter?
It does, yeah. It does for a number of reasons. The first thing, though, to keep in mind is that this is a case between the states in the Supreme Court. And when the states have arguments directly between themselves, the Supreme Court has what they call original jurisdiction. They have an exclusive jurisdiction over the fights between the states. In this case, we've got this interesting situation where the 2 main antagonists, Texas and New Mexico, are now arm in arm in front of the Supreme Court saying we're in agreement about something. The United States intervened in this case, and when they intervened, Texas in particular was very particular, saying we're happy to have them in the room, but we want to limit this to questions about interpretation of the compact. The issues that the Bureau of Reclamation in the United States have are issues that could potentially be addressed by lower courts. And there are actually cases that have been stayed waiting for the Supreme Court decision where the reclamation could return and have their issues addressed. So that's sort of the substance of the question that you've asked. The procedural impact is that the Supreme Court, if they decide not to just accept the special master's recommendation as is, may decide to have a trial and hear the United States objections. And I suspect that's going to be likely. That pushes out the time frame a little bit. So if that's the case, I expect we may see a decision from the Supreme Court considering the U.S.'s concerns sometime mid-2024.
Wow, okay, so we still have a ways to go.
A little bit, yeah, but that's pretty fast in Supreme Court world. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So if there were a decision, or if the settlement as it's sort of been negotiated now were set into place, what kinds of things do you think would change on the ground?
Well, the main impact is going to be that historically we have had one delivery point for our water to Texas, and that's the Elephant Butte Reservoir, which is in New Mexico, well above the Texas state line. So the notion was we would deliver to that reservoir, and then the water would be split 57% to the New Mexicans below, 43% to the Texans below. But given the alleged overuse of water by New Mexico, Texas now wants to have a gauging station right at the state line. So we'll have 2 delivery points. We'll continue to deliver to Elephant Butte just as we've always done. The same rules apply. But now we also have a gauge there right above the Texas state line where they will also be measuring to make sure we get sufficient water to meet Texas's apportionment.
And so why do you think New Mexicans, and not just farmers or cities in the South, like why should anybody in New Mexico care about this?
Well, it's our obligation. The obligations under the compact are held by all New Mexicans. It's not just the farmers who have to deliver the water. And so if there was a call to deliver a lot more water, that would potentially come from not only the lower Rio Grande, but potentially the middle Rio Grande and other places along the river. Moreover, the compact is an agreement. It's a contract of sorts, and we as New Mexicans should stand by our word.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a long history to this lawsuit, but I know oftentimes New Mexicans see water issues in the state as Texans stealing our water, taking our water.
Right.
Is this lawsuit an example of something like that, or is there a deeper issue?
Well, it's important to remember that the allegations here was that New Mexico was the one stealing water, and of course New Mexico made counterclaims that said, no, Texas is also pumping the heck out of groundwater, and that's impacting us as well, and there was back and forth on that issue. But in reality, if you go down to the southern part of the Rio Grande project, as we call it, the two irrigation districts, Elephant Butte Irrigation District and El Paso's #1 irrigation district, they're really, even though they're managed separately across the state lines, they're really an interwoven system. So we have places down there where, obviously New Mexico is delivering water to Texans, but we also have places where Texas is delivering water to New Mexicans. It's really one big system down there, and so it's not really useful to say Texans are the other. They are part of the family down there, and the more we can cooperate, the better.
Yeah. So do you think, as the climate warms, as things get drier and water challenges increase, do you think that we'll see more of these types of lawsuits, or do you think people will remember or learn how to cooperate?
Sure. As water supplies are reduced due to climate change, I'm certain we're going to see more of these kind of disputes. I mean, things just get harder and harder, the less water you have. In this particular case, I'm kind of optimistic. Part of the problem, part of what got us here was, to use the old phrase, a failure to communicate. Again, now we've got Texas and New Mexico and Colorado all, again, arm in arm in front of the Supreme Court. They've worked out a good settlement. They're focused on getting it implemented. And some of the actions they're taking to make sure that New Mexico can meet its obligations include heavy investments in conservation, developing programs where we can temporarily allow farmers to lease their water to help us meet our obligations, including our obligations under the Endangered Species Act up here in the Middle Valley. And stormwater capture is something that folks are really heavily focusing on, because with climate change, we all are expecting these more freakish kind of storms, and that, if we can monitor where those are coming in through our arroyos and side channels and capture those, that's going to be a big help. And then the last element that I think folks are really starting to think hard about, but it's going to be a much thornier issue, is utilizing deep brackish water and desalinating that to a point where it can be used, either for agriculture or for other purposes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So do you think that this lawsuit, which was focused on the lower Rio Grande, do you think it holds any lessons or potential warnings for upstream, including here in the Middle Valley?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, and a lot of those relate to the items I just listed. We have to communicate better, and just recently there was a get-together, a tour of the river that was organized by the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District and the Elephant Butte Irrigation District. Not something that's happened historically. We've gotten those boards together for a lunch once in a while, but now they are talking about how their operations can complement one another and can assist with the state's obligations to Texas. Yeah.
So just lastly, I'm curious, you're a water attorney, you've been working on these issues for a long time. What do you really wish that New Mexicans better understood or talked about more, maybe particularly on the Rio Grande?
Boy, that's a great question. And I should clarify, I was probably one of the few lawyers in the state who was not engaged in the Supreme Court case, which is probably why I can talk to you a little more freely about it. But yeah, we all just have to constantly do better. In this case, we were sort of trying to hold the line. We were trying to maintain the existing agreement that we formulated, back in 1938. But yeah, climate change is upon us. I mean, you felt how hot it is this summer, right? And we all know we're going to have less water, and we're going to have more fires and more challenges. So thinking ahead and preparing for that, getting beyond just how do we deal with today's problems is an obligation that falls on all of us, whether we're irrigating a half acre up in Tierra Maria or you're managing a district that serves 60,000 acres. We should all be thinking the same way. And one thing that encourages me is that 20 years ago, you rarely heard people talking about the environment as a concern as part of their water management. Now that's a consistent line throughout. And joined to that, of course, now is making sure we meet our obligations to Texas as well. And I'm optimistic that we're going to do that. We'll see what the Supreme Court says, of course.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Adrian. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's been great to be here. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you to Laura and Adrian Oglesby for that conversation, and thank you for joining us and for staying informed and engaged. We'll see you again next week in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the viewers like you.